Welcome into another episode of Anchor Talk Psychology. My name is David Kapolis. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and I live with bipolar disorder. And as always, I discuss all things psychology related. Today is a topic that was actually requested um, to me, and it's very topical. It's something that we all mostly have dealt with in our lives. And regardless of what people come to see me for, whether it's a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, post traumatic stress, if it's specific to bipolar disorder, depression, eating disorders, personality disorders, you name it, um, this topic always gets interweaved in it. And the topic is relationship conflict, right? So it's not just intimate relationships, but a majority of what we talk about today will be about that. So what I'm going to do today is give essentially a guide for how to work through and navigate relationship conflict, right? It's a big topic, it's a big subject. So how am I going to do that in a short amount of time? Well, stay tuned and find out, right? So a lot of what I'll be talking about today comes from the school from John Gottman and the Gottman methodology. I will leave a link um, to his main website and a great resource there for relationships in the description, so you can click on that after. I'm going to start with a quote from John Gottman, which kind of sets the tone for what I'm going to be discussing today. So, Gottman says to make a relationship last, couples must become better friends, learn to manage conflict, and create ways to support one another's hopes and dreams. Right? Um, that's sort of his. Out of all the quotes that he's ever said, to me, that kind of like boils down his whole methodology and everything that he's captured over the years through research. Um, Again, to make a relationship last, couples must become better friends, learn to manage conflict, and create ways to support one another's hopes and dreams, right? So, one of the key things that is important to cover on this topic of creating a guide for relationship conflict is to first lay out the framework of understanding that relationships are not measured or based on how much or how little conflict one has. A lot of people think that that is the metric, right? Um, Truth is, there's so many, but one of the key things that I want to kind of debunk right off the bat is it's not how much. You don't want to measure the health and strength and wellness of your relationships by how much or how little conflict you have, because there are some couples who have a lot of conflict who navigate it very, very well, and there are some couples who have lots and lots of conflict and they really hold it in. It's not really outward. They might seethe with some resentment, and so that's more of like the quiet, insidious, toxic relationships, right? So again, we're not measuring the health of a relationship on how much or how little conflict, but really rather it's how you navigate through the conflict, right? It's the way in which you show care, love, and support for each other through conflict, because conflict is inevitable. It's supposed to happen. If conflict, I always get very afraid when I'm working with couples. I wouldn't say afraid, but I always get worried when I have a couple say to me, we don't really fight that much. We don't really argue. Oh boy, not always a good, like I said, a good metric. I would prefer working with the couples who are yelling at each other, but at least they're showing some level of care and passion in doing it. But at the same time, we really want to be mindful in our relationships about how we approach and navigate conflict. So, one part of Gottman methodology, John Gottman, through all of his research over the years and decades at this point, is that he found that the one key metric in a relationship, of many, is that there needs to be 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction rather. So 5 positive interactions for 1 negative interaction, right? And from that, John Gottman lays out what he calls the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. Sounds very doom and gloom, right? But what he found over the years through research is that these 4 things are 4 of the key distinguishing factors that he finds that lead to separation or divorce, or at the very least, just unhappy relationships. And that number 1 is criticism. The next is defensiveness. The next is contempt. And then after that would be stonewalling. So criticism, obviously, being critical of your partner, being negative, being harsh, which is then usually being met with defensiveness. Defensiveness can be not taking ownership of your stuff, not owning it, not saying, hey, yep, I screwed up, I apologize, I really mean it, I'm gonna work on that. That was totally on me. The next is contempt. That's just like seething anger and frustration. That's where it gets nasty. Where you have contemptuousness is akin to just like, for lack of a better term, piss and vinegar. Like you're really really pissed off at this person, and you see them and you're kind of almost at times repulsed by them. And then the last is stonewalling. Stonewalling is when conflict comes about and then one or both people in the relationship don't engage at all. They seem disengaged altogether. They won't discuss it. They'll just walk off. They won't approach the topic. And so that's also a very bad sign. Again, this is a guide for relationship conflict. So what do you do with all this? What is the way in which we should approach relationship conflict? Because again, it's supposed to happen, right? So the first thing is what Gottman talks about is understanding, and this is a hard one to figure out, but if you can at least work towards it, try to understand what is a solvable problem and what is a perpetual problem. Solvable problems are things that you can fix. For example, someone might be a little untidy. Someone doesn't manage their time very well. Someone maybe doesn't communicate their feelings very well, or has a hard time with money management, right? These are things that can be worked on, that can be fixed, to some degree or another, right? And then the other carve out from that is what is a perpetual problem. Perpetual problems are problems that are always going to be there. They're not exactly solvable, but the couple has to find a way to manage it. A good example of a perpetual problem: chronic health conditions. Number 1, right? Chronic health conditions. Family's there. Extended family, close family, in-laws was a big one. And personality traits sometimes are perpetual issues. Medical and psychiatric conditions that are chronic, right? They're there, right? And they're going to be occurring. Children, too, some of them can be problematic, right? So sometimes that's a perpetual issue. So solvable versus perpetual. So a solvable problem, you work together to find solutions. Perpetual issues, you work to find how to communicate through the issues and be kind to one another. Right? So that's important too. So understand what is a solvable problem versus a perpetual problem. Now, this is a really important part here. This is what I'm going to call the guide to relationship conflict. This is the breakdown on how you do it. How do you work through conflict, right? So the first thing is that you have to come together. No matter what happens throughout the process, you really want to check in with yourself. That's the key part in any relationship conflict. Really check in with yourself and be very self-aware. That's kind of the key. So I'll give an example, a real life example. I hope my wife doesn't kill me on this, but I don't think she will. I'll give you an example as to how to work through relationship conflict. When my wife and I, when we first moved in together, right, we got an apartment. I was having company over often, early and often, and I've used this example with my patients. So I was having company over, and I wasn't really asking her much. I mean, in advance. Eventually, I would. I would start asking her, but she would always say yes because she didn't want me to be disappointed. And I was having friends, I was having family, I was just having, acquaintances come over a lot. And to me, I didn't realize I was doing it. I wasn't aware of how much I was doing that. And eventually one day, my wife comes to me and she says, do you think we could we have less company? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Why? She goes, well, it's just kind of a lot sometimes, and sometimes it takes away from like you and me, and I'd prefer if we could have less company. And she put it pretty nicely, and I got very defensive. I was like, well, I don't understand. I'm like, what's the big deal? And it took a while for us to kind of figure this out, right? So this is essentially the blueprint or the guide to how to work through it. So, okay, so we've identified the issue. The issue is company. So we could put that somewhere up here. Company was the issue, right? So company is the problem that we've identified. All right, so here's where people get stuck. This is where couples get stuck oftentimes. And here's where I'll guide you through the going deeper and figuring things out. If me and my wife had just stayed there, it would have been a circular argument. It would have been back and forth. It would have been, well, why can I have more company? Well, why can't you just have less company? Well, why can't I just have more? I don't understand. Why can't you have less? I don't understand. So you're staying on the surface level and you're stuck and you're not going anywhere. And then you say, like, worst case scenario, you start building resentments. And I'll resent her for not letting me have company, or she'll resent me for when company's over, right? It could build to that level. So, after sort of like doing a deep dive, I kind of thought about it, and then I asked my wife. Here's part of the guide. The guide is empathy and understanding, right? So we first need to, both parts of the relationship need to understand and be introspective and self-aware of what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's called metacognition. Insight, introspection, metacognition. You're figuring out what is happening, first of all, and being aware of it. Then you dig in on the why. And we don't always know why. The answers aren't always obvious. Just so happens my wife is very lucky and she married a therapist, right? No, I'm just kidding. But in truthfulness, this is what we did. This was the exercise, and this is the guide and the blueprint for working through our relationship. I asked her, well, what is it about company that makes you feel the way that you do about it? Or first of all, what do you feel? She goes, well, I just kind of feel really anxious sometimes when people are over. And I go, well, what are you anxious about? It's just a few of my buddies. We're just ordering pizza and watching a movie, or we're just hanging out, playing a board game. It's very relaxed. So what is it that you're nervous about? And it took her some time. She's like, well, I'm kind of an introvert. I'm like, I know you are, but that's more than like going out. This is our turf. Like, this is our home. and these are safe people, so you know them, and so you do really well with people. So what is it really? And then it took her a minute. She's thinking and she's thinking and she's thinking, and she's like, "Oh, I think I know why I'm kind of nervous about company." And I go, Why?" She said, "When I was growing up, company was very different. We would get 2 to 3 weeks maybe advance notice about company, and for those whole 2 3 weeks, there'd be this long-lasting anxiety with my mom and dad, and they'd be so nervous about people coming over, and my mom would be like scrubbing every corner of the house and like bleaching everything, and then taking out the fine china and buffing it down, and then buying the most expensive and really nice. She would go to the meat purveyor and get very expensive food, and it would be a bit lavish and be a big deal, and they'd be so worried about being judged, and it was a big to do, and it was anxiety provoking. I go, oh, so company to you represents anxiety? And she goes, yeah. No, I didn't know that. She goes, I guess I didn't either. And then she goes, well, what is it about you that why do you always want to have company over? And I had to do a deep dive on this one. And this kind of brought up some like trauma stuff. My father, when he was alive, he was a good man at heart, and he suffered with bipolar disorder, and he had an opioid abuse issue. And when things were going well in the home, we would have a lot of company. People would be over, people from the church would be over, people from the neighborhood would be over, I have 3 sisters and their friends would be over, and then all of our friends would interact. And so company to me represented a time of safety and security and happiness. So here's a statement to remember, a key statement to remember about relationship conflict. It's never about the thing. The argument and the conflict is never about what we think it is. It's about what that thing represents to each person. In this case, the thing is company. What does it represent to me? Deep down, it represents safety, security, and happiness, and happy memories. What does it represent to my wife? Anxiety, trauma, frustration, not good things. So who was right and who was wrong in this scenario? The answer is yes. In other words, neither person is right or wrong. Another key thing to remember in relationship conflict is stop trying to win the fight. Stop trying to win the argument. Instead, try to understand your partner more. You don't have to agree with them, but try to understand your partner more. Otherwise, again, you get stuck in the surface level stuff. So how do me and my wife resolve this conflict stuff? We just learn to go deep and try to understand ourselves and each other more. That way, again, you're not stuck on the surface level stuff. And then we would have thought we were fighting or arguing about company. We weren't. It goes so much deeper than that. That's the key lesson in the guide for relationship conflict. So to break it down again, first you have to identify what the thing is. Name it. Okay, what is it? Then you have to understand yourself more. Check in with yourself and know what you're thinking, why you're thinking that way, and same for your behavior. What are you doing and why are you doing that? Be empathetic towards your partner and help them understand either themselves or help them express themselves and help them understand themselves more. So it's not so much about the thing, it's about the why behind it. And when you can do that and show love and care and empathy towards one another, there isn't a thing that you can't work towards or work on. Right? That way you don't get stuck in those circular arguments. and it creates greater intimacy. You have a big fight with your friend, you hash it out, and then you feel like closer with each other. It's kind of like that in intimate relationships too, right? Again, it's about love, care, and empathy and understanding and being soft and kind in those times of conflict and not doubling down and trying to win the fight. Because I promise you, nobody wins the fight. You'll get into a huge fight, and the other person just goes, "You know what? You're right. You're absolutely right." I mean, that's rare, right? Where it's like, "Oh yes, I hadn't seen it that way." And thank you for yelling it too, because if you weren't yelling, I wouldn't have really understood. So hopefully that's a helpful breakdown. How to work through relationship conflict. I might have a part two for this, depending on how people like this one or not. But um, keep in mind, be kind yourself first, and be kind to your partner. At the end of the day, everything else will work out just fine. All right, David Kapolis, Anchor Talk Psychology.